Hi, everyone, and we're here for another edition of Pricing Trends. So today we're going to be talking about pricing trends and practices actually in MedTech and how to unlock additional margin growth. Just to do some introductions, Mike, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, thanks, Avy. I'm Mike White. I'm a principal with the Alexander Group, and I co-lead our healthcare practice, focusing specifically in MedTech. So I've had an opportunity to work with a majority of the leading players and a number of smaller, high-growth players, companies within the MedTech space.
And my name's Avy Punwasee. I'm a partner at Revenue Management Labs. We specifically focus on pricing, and that's where we partner with Alexander Group. Our real focus is on looking at customers, competition, or the market, and bringing the financials together to make sure we get to a balanced pricing approach out there in the market. So what we're going to be focusing on today in specific is pricing trends that we're seeing out there in the market, and actually how that translates into why that's relevant for MedTech and some of the practices that we're seeing in MedTech. This is an ongoing series, so you can see that we've had a couple past episodes, and we'll have another one coming up in September that's focused on leveraging data to within strategic pricing decisions. But let's jump into what we're going to focus on today. Really, at a high level, there's going to be three kind of key elements. One is that we've actually done some industry-specific research, and we want to show, well, how does MedTech actually perform versus other industries in terms of revenue and price appreciation, and what can we take from that? In terms of, is MedTech doing a better job, a worse job? Is there some opportunities on the table? And where we're going to spend the majority of our time today is looking at, as we look at these results, we can see that companies that overperform, and when I say overperform, they consistently set higher targets. They achieve at higher levels. There's some consistent behaviors that these companies exhibit. And there's six consistent behaviors. So we wanted to go through what are those behaviors, and specifically to MedTech, why they're important and why they have a lot of relevance. And we'll just close it out with just making sure that we give you some key takeaways and you can take that back for your organization. So without further ado, let's kind of jump into it. But before we jump into the detailed findings, just wanted to give everyone a little context on where all this data is coming from. So in early 2024, we had undertaken a study, and what the study was focused on was understanding how are companies actually going out there and setting what pricing they think they're going to get in the market from a target perspective. How are they actually achieving that? What are some of the processes that they're going through to get there? And this was also done from an industry-specific perspective. So just really quickly, there's around 520 participants. Companies had to be over $150 million in sales to be able to participate. On average, 70% of the companies were actually $1 billion plus who were within the respondents. You had to be above a VP level to actually participate, and only individuals from finance, sales, marketing, or the C-suite were in there. And these individuals also had to have knowledge of the P&L and also responsibility within the P&L. So they had to actually be able to quote numbers or ranges out of the P&L, or else they were screened out of the survey. And just to clarify in terms of the geographies, this included both North America and the EU. So the results you're going to see today are blended together. But if you'd like, we can actually go ahead and decompose these. So with that, just jump in. First off, what we're looking at here is a high-level overview of revenue growth. And there's three bars that you can see under each of the industries. So I'll focus on medical technology here. The first bar is for 2023 in terms of the expected revenue performance on the improvement. There's about a 3.45% improvement that was expected from a target perspective. In terms of actual performance, that came out at 3.36. And from an expected performance for our target within 2024, that's actually moving up to 4.28%. Now, obviously, what we've stacked here is this is in declining order, so you can see where medical technology is stacked versus everyone else. I think where this gets much more interesting is when we start to look at, well, what's happening from a price increase perspective. And if we look at pricing, we can see that MedTech companies were expecting to take around 5.22 in terms of total price, and they actually achieved around 5.17. The first thing to take away is you want to look at, well, this 5.17 in terms of what they actually achieved from a price perspective versus the 3.36, what they saw from top line growth. There's a pretty significant difference between the two. And what that difference is probably driven by is that they took a 5.17 price increase, but the difference should be what they lost in terms of volume or customers. Now, thinking about that, if you're doing your pricing and you're able to hold your volume, you'd expect a corresponding revenue increase that you have within your price increase. So we can see that about 65% of that price increase was actually retained. But what's interesting as you look across different industries, for example, manufacturing, you see that they took a 4.3% increase and they were actually able to translate about 4% of that to top line. So they were getting a much better trade-off. The second thing that I would take away from here is with this increased aspiration for pricing in 2024, if you look at the aspiration for the top line, they're having an equivalent trade-off in that they're still retaining about 65%. So they're still losing an equivalent amount of customers or equivalent amount of volume. And we would expect, as we're getting more aggressive in terms of what we want to take for pricing, we'd want to get more sophisticated in our approach and get a better trade-off. So
yeah, and Avi, I think one other point on that, specific to MedTech or why we see some differences here, probably a few different things. So one, there's a volume component, of course. While price increased, there may not have been a sufficient volume that you would have expected. Broadly in the MedTech space, 2023 was a better year in the market than 2022. And 2024 is on track to be an improvement on that. However, there still is the part of this is driven by this trade-off between price increase and volume. The second is that's a bit unique to MedTech is the fact that the contract structures are a bit different, meaning there's contract structures that are written at a gross revenue incorporating the price, the 5.22 price increase that we see, but rebates and other discounts happen as part of that structure that translates to a lower net revenue. That idea, that contract structure is a bit more common in MedTech than it is in other industries. And that's part of what's driving the difference that you laid out as well.
Thanks. And, one additional element to keep in mind, and I'm going to focus on the left side on 2023 net price realization. And this is just breaking back what we had on the other slide. In terms of the actual price that they had achieved was about a 5.17% price increase. In terms of discounts, actually increased the discounts by 2.8%. So the net price realization was around 2.4%. Now we can argue whether CPI is the right benchmark or not, but if we look at the overall prices that are out there in the consumer market around 3.4%, we can see that we're gapped to CPI around 1.1%. Now, what's interesting for 2024 in terms of the higher aspiration that we saw of taking prices up by 6.64%, and where the industry CPI is going to be sitting at 2.55, the net price increase anticipated of 3% is more than the benchmark. I think the thing that we want to get across is that it's going to be a tougher pricing year in 2024 for companies specifically in MedTech and how those targets are set, because if we're trying to justify those things with cost increases, well, you're going up in the market in general. So it's going to be a tougher year, and it's going to be important to get more sophisticated in terms of those pricing approaches. Breaking that back. So as we talk about companies that really achieved those targets and didn't achieve the targets, there's really 6 key things that really differentiated companies that did well and that didn't do well. The first element that we saw, the companies that set higher pricing targets and actually achieved a 2% higher net price realization, which is pretty material, was that the C-suite was actually involved in pricing decisions. And as we kind of sat back and thought about, well, why is C-suite involvement driving such higher price realization? A couple things kind of came to mind or really kind of crystallized. One, the C-suite's usually very attuned with what the value proposition is that the company is actually eking out, and more aggressive in taking corresponding pricing actions to realize that. The other element is that in terms of as they look at competition and understanding what kind of competitive price gap they would feel comfortable opening, much more backbone in a lot of those decisions, whereas if we push those decisions lower in the organizations, sometimes we get, as we're working our way through on a deal by deal basis, oftentimes we want to be much more on par with competition, where we might think we need to make a discount when we're not looking at the portfolio in its entirety. And the last element that is really critical here, as the pricing reviews go higher in the organization, and it's just due to the amount of reviews that are going on, the process gets more standardized in terms of the KPIs, the reporting that's happening. So as that process gets more standardized, you find that you have much better results. Now, why is that important for MedTech? And Mike, I'm sure you can speak about this much better, but given just the constant value re-engineering that's going on in terms of the amount of innovation that's coming out to the market, the C-suite being familiar with the strategic role that each of those products are supposed to be playing and how these innovations are supposed to be positioned, having these individuals as part of that pricing process ensures the integrity of that pricing strategy at the end of the day as we translate it out to the market.
Yeah, that's right. It does. So certainly, innovation in MedTech is high and higher than I'd argue than many industries. What we see there, it does translate to stronger pricing approaches and C-suite involvement, and then especially as you consider the reimbursement element that's factored into the pricing decisions in MedTech, playing a significant role as well within the new products or the product advancements that drive that.
Second element that comes up is that companies that overperform actually review pricing more frequently. And sitting back and thinking about this, it shouldn't be a real head scratcher. If you're looking at the market more often, if you're looking at your pricing more often, you're reviewing your key core metrics more often on how volume shifting, competitor prices are shifting, consumer behavior is shifting. You're also able to identify pricing errors quickly. It's funny how many times we run into companies that think they've taken a certain amount of price at a customer, and as they get into their annual review and they're looking back at it and what they had expected and what was actually achieved or what was given back to customers in concessions, it wasn't actually achieved. So not too much that's really exciting here. The other thing that companies that do review pricing much more quickly and more frequently, they're more apt to test things out there in the market. So they can implement new pricing approaches quickly or test new price points in the market and get that feedback much faster. So as they are able to do that and pivot to the market, they achieve higher levels of revenue growth associated with pricing. Now, Of course, the more pricing reviews, it requires more work, but obviously has the additional financial benefit associated with that. So from that perspective, why is this really important from a MedTech perspective? And we're seeing that specifically in MedTech, like a lot of other industries too, increased pricing transparency in terms of how it's getting a little bit. The market used to be very opaque to be able to see where actual transacted prices were, but as more communication is occurring in the market and there is increasing transparency, well, whenever there's more competitive transparency and customers can see, we expect volume to shift more frequently or customers to change their sources or be more apt. So it encourages organizations to frequently review the pricing, and of course they're reviewing what's going on with customer shifts and volume shifts, and they're able to assess if pricing is actually a contributor to that or not.
Yeah, and this is particularly important in MedTech because of the nature of the shift to outpatient. So you have a continued shift to outpatient in terms of procedures, and therefore that causes complexity in terms of how you're pricing to to the or how you can provide pricing to the hospital versus the ASC or clinic or other facility, requiring this constant review. There's the transparency that Avi mentioned between doctors as they work across these facilities, and causes the need to be really in tune on a frequent basis with their pricing strategies because of the complexity of pricing differently and different expectations in an outpatient facility versus a hospital.
Third big adjustment, or what we see from high performing organizations, is they have clear discounting guidelines. And when I say clear discounting guidelines, that the sales team is actually provided with clear discounting guidelines on certain groups of customers. Here is what is the range of discounts are allowed. Here's where they're not allowed to go beyond. And here's where they don't even need to seek approval. Now, why? And it was interesting that companies that actually had these clear discounting guidelines, they were actually at a higher amount than companies that didn't have guidelines and where they were discounting. Now, which might seem counterintuitive, but why this makes sense on why they're actually performing better. One, they can quote quicker. And almost uniformly, as we work across organizations, we find that companies that are able to quote quicker, they actually translate into higher win rates. And of course, the associated revenue and margin that comes across from that. Secondly, companies that don't have these clear guidelines in place, oftentimes the organization, the pricing teams, the executive team, as these deals or ad hoc contracts are going through to be approved, it weighs down a lot of the resources in terms of approving these ad hoc deals. And as opposed to the organization being focused on big pricing initiatives, where should we be positioning ourselves competitively? What should be our pricing aspirations? How should we be thinking about getting in these new pricing structures? It's very much on a deal by deal basis, and it's kind of death by a thousand cuts. So you might be optimizing this 1 in 1,000, but you're not optimizing the entire portfolio. And the last element, which is actually underappreciated, by having these clear guidelines in place, it achieves alignment across the organization. The sales team, the product team, the executive team, and the pricing team understand why we're doing what we're doing, why we drew lines, and why we drew lines. So as we go to thinking about how our strategy is shifting or dealing with unique deals, we're not apt to go ahead and have flexibility in that, and it's constantly evolving. Although, of course, if the market changes, if the competitors change out there, or customer needs change, I'll change. But you're less apt to find that you're going to constantly have inflation in what you're doing from a discounting perspective. So they're much better in terms of actually holding the line on that discounting.
Yeah, and
So
obviously this is such an opportunity as you lead into the MedTech application, such an opportunity for MedTech companies as well, many of them have discounting guidelines, broadly laid out for our sales people as they're thinking about their customers. Most do not have it segmented. So you get into different tiers of customers so that sales reps are aware of where they have a little bit more flexibility in specific segments of customers versus where they don't. So it's such a significant opportunity for the reasons that you stated to in medtech because many don't have the segmented pricing guidelines for at the rep level in place.
perfect. Fourth item, um, a lot of companies that we're seeing that are overperforming are investing in artificial intelligence and actual machine learning. Um, Two things that are really driving this. One is that companies that are investing in AI and machine learning, they usually have a lot of the basics in place from the pricing strategy perspective. So they've got the people in place, they've got data and systems, they've got training in place, they've got the basics, and they're really evolving their pricing acumen to that next level. The other thing is that if you're really investing in AI and ML, well, that's only as good as the data you're getting. So typically we find that companies that are putting investments in these areas, they spent a lot of time collecting data, sanitizing data, thinking about how that data informs their pricing strategy. So they force the maximum data capture and they're able to leverage it. Why? From a medtech perspective, this is interesting and untapped potential is that we see a lot of different data sources that are able to be leveraged, and typically we find that it's underutilized in terms of the data that's out there. There's a lot of focus on cost and the contracting systems that we have in place, but thinking about how we start to bring together some of these more disparate data sets and thinking about, what are some of the behavioral elements that we're capturing on our customers, and how do we start to think about to bring that data to bear on some of our pricing decisions and actually bring that into some of the analytics that happens will be a huge growth lever for organizations. Fifth item, this one, we find that companies that overperform, they have dedicated pricing teams. And a couple of drivers in here, if you have a dedicated pricing team, obviously they're going to have deeper capabilities in the area of pricing. Number two, when we find that the pricing team is nested within finance, sales, products, or marketing, often there have conflicted priorities on what's getting executed, not necessarily the overall corporate objectives that can be a bit more balanced. Why is this important for a medtech application? What this really helps allow at the end of the day by having this dedicated team, you're going to get a more well-balanced approach where your pricing team can work cross-functionally across the organization to give insight into the customers from the sales team, to give insight into value from the product teams and understanding also from the competitors from the sales team, and also the financials from the finance team, to bring that all together to bring a much more fulsome pricing recommendation that the team can align around and make sure that we're satisfying the needs of the organization and the needs of the customers at the end of the day. And they have the capabilities as we transition away from cost-based pricing, but to do some much more innovative practices as we start to talk about things like solution-based pricing or outcome-based pricing and what that's going to look like, and making sure all the pieces fit together.
Yeah, this is the second one, Avi, where I would say medtech companies have an opportunity to take a step forward. Most do not have a separate pricing team like this, and the ones that do, as you pointed out, it becomes more effective at their pricing strategy and execution. Majority have it falls within sales or sales ops or finance or revenue ops or finance. So this is a second, I think, opportunity. In addition to what I stated earlier on having segmented discount guidelines for sellers in place, having a dedicated pricing team is something that MedTech companies, I think, have its opportunity to take a step forward in with their pricing strategies.
And last but not least, and I've kind of referenced this along the way, so I won't dwell on it, is higher performing companies have a balanced approach to pricing. Oftentimes, we find that companies really focus on one key area, but when we say a balanced approach to pricing, they're looking at the customer and the needs of the customer, and Mike said it, the various segments of the customers and how their needs differ. They're looking at the competitive market and read the competitive market. Again, coming back to segments, the competitors differ by customer segment and how that shopping list looks. And they're looking at the granular financials. It's not just the financials that are driving the decision. We need to hit this X percentage of market margin, or we do not do this deal. It's a much more balanced approach. And what that balanced approach really enables is a sustainable strategy that is not just focused on, hey, if our input costs shift, our entire go-to-market pricing strategy and discounting strategy shifts. It's a much more integrated approach that we're catering for the needs of our customers, catering for the needs of what's happening competitively on where we're positioning ourselves, and the needs financially of the organization, which is critical, especially when we get into the complexities that occur within the MedTech sector. Now, I know we're right up on time here, so I just want to make sure we can round off, and what we want to take away from today is that there's really 6 key things as you're looking to close out 2024 and starting to think about what 2025 needs to do from a revenue and pricing perspective. That's going to really help you step change and improve that capture that we were talking between your revenue target aspiration and your pricing target aspiration. 1, getting your C-suite involved in these pricing decisions. 2, reviewing more frequently. It doesn't necessarily need to go to monthly, but if you're at annually, start to go to biannually. Thinking about more structured guidelines that you can provide to the sales team, especially segmented guidelines that you can provide to the sales team to make sure that your pricing decisions are actually being adhered to. 4, this isn't saying that you need to go out and invest in AI and ML, but make sure that you're investing in the basics. If you don't have the basics in place, get the basics in place first. 5, if you don't have a dedicated pricing team in place, thinking about how you get those capabilities and that you have the deep enough capabilities that you can go ahead and execute. And lastly, even if that entire balanced process approach is not in place, as pricing decisions are being brought to you, starting to ask the questions that you're always covering these 3 perspectives. What's going on from a customer perspective or customer needs perspective? What segment are we dealing with? What's going on with competition? How do we know they're the relevant competition? What visibility do we have and where are we positioned? And lastly, what does that stack out with the financials? And as we start to move around the price, what's the implication for the customers? What's that implication for our competitive position? And how does that affect our overall picture? I think, in terms of going on, we put a lot of information into today. If you want to dig down into anything, Mike and I would be happy to share the more detailed study findings or talk about how this is relevant to you. And as we look towards our next webinar in September on leveraging data analytics and strategic pricing, we look forward to getting into that with you as well. Any last thoughts, Mike, that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think it's such certainly a focus for MedTech companies given what we've gone through over the past couple of years, and appreciate the time today and would be happy to talk if there's anything that we can help with.
Thank you.